So I want to welcome everyone, and we're very pleased to have you here for this webinar, Redefining Graduate Reading Requirements. We're coming to you from the Chicago Language Center at the University of Chicago. I'm Kathy Bauman, the director of the center, but in the context of our academic reading work, I'm the director of curriculum and instruction. Joining me is Amit Dorson, director of the Office of Language Assessment here at the university, but also the director of assessment and evaluation for this work, and Nick Swinehart, who started us off, who is the managing director of instructional technology in the Language Center, but directs online pedagogy specifically for the work that we do in academic reading at the university. I'm going to start my segment by referencing a conference presentation from 2023. Amit and I gave with Elizabeth Bernhardt, who's particularly meaningful for both of us, as she was, we would consider, the preeminent American scholar in advanced reading pedagogy in the US, foreign language pedagogy in the US. And she opened her session hoping to provide a synopsis of graduate reading requirements across the US, but instead she ended up raising a lot of questions and issues in the work she had done surveying different major research universities and programs. And this is a list of those, really a jumbled array of very different definitions of requirements. And in terms of what language meant, a variety of skills, speaking, reading, also different levels, often unclear which levels. In many instances, she saw a curriculum rooted in the early 20th century, especially in terms of translation. And she did see consistently a requirement for language knowledge in the major PhD programs across the main language programs, including English and Comp Lit. But it wasn't always clear that these were in terms of reading, in terms of translation, sometimes in terms of oral proficiency. The question in her mind was who is defining them and how are they defining them? One university did stipulate the language skills necessary to conduct high-level research, which definitely points toward reading, although reading was not mentioned specifically. Another university's requirement was defined by its process, where a student chooses an input and is tested on that input. Of course, that leaves open the question of whether the student can read other inputs that aren't prepared ahead of time. Many institutions still use translation. It's both a curriculum and a test. Some require a course in reading knowledge without much detail about what was happening in that course or how the skills were assessed. And some even accept first and second language courses. So Elizabeth Bernhardt, Dr. Bernhardt did mention in that presentation those years ago, the work of colleagues at Chicago. She was talking about our own work, focusing on the meaning of the requirement, asking what does it actually mean to read secondary academic literature in a second language. This is how we then are going forward to define that type of requirement. And this was really gratifying for us because her theoretical and practical work had really been an underpinning and a fundamental source for our own work here. And 8 to 10 years ago, the University of Chicago was in a similar situation as reflected in these aspects by Dr. Bernhardt. Yes, we had a reading requirement, but it was basically defined by a translation exam, which was supported by translation courses. And in both the Language Center and the Office of Language Assessment, we saw often we were often recipients of questions and problems on multiple levels. So on the student level, it was clear to us that students realized that they needed to read and not translate, and translation was not a reading skill, or did not provide them, studying translation did not provide them with reading skills. Also, in the big group tests that were given every quarter, they often received an input that was not in their discipline. So a group of 40 students from 12 different programs might all get a reading or get a reading input from ethnomusicology. Additionally, we had international students with their own native language now being tested in a second language and being asked to translate it into a third language, which was English. And many, many students responded by putting off their requirement until the very end of their program, and then very often, obviously not being able to do any reading while they were students, and sometimes saying, now that I finally passed that test in German, I never want to read German for the rest of my life. So it was having a very negative washback effect in terms of the process of translation, testing, and teaching. On the faculty level, the departments really felt that they wanted to have a meaningful requirement, but because of this misalignment between their articulated requirement, which I heard them do in multiple meetings, because the requirement was being assessed with translation, students approached it as a way to just check a box or jump through a hoop, and it was in fact not meaningful to the students. There was a real disconnect in the work, in the discipline, in the actual disciplinary work students were doing. And finally, departments expressed to us, or I would say faculty expressed to us, that students who had passed the test, the translation test, could not read. So this was another real failure and really a direct result of this misalignment. On the departmental level, there was different messaging, different processes in place across departments and programs, different outcomes, obviously. So a real jumble of inconsistencies. This was impacting time to degree, their progress to degree, causing many problems, and also putting a lot of pressure on directors of graduate study and on administrators who had to deal with these many issues of graduate students struggling to complete the degree with all of these issues in mind. So a committee charged by the Dean of the Humanities Division at the time asked us to specifically look, a language learning and teaching committee asked us to specifically look at the issues related to the graduate students and their language requirements. In fact, this was a mandate to us in the Language Center and the Office of Language Assessment to take this on and try to solve it. So in the Language Center, working in very close collaboration with the Office of Language Assessment, we approach this project, we approach this mandate in the way that we approach all of our work as a reverse design exercise or with a reverse design approach. So my colleague Ahmet Dorsin now will describe the research into this question that Elizabeth Bernhardt had posed, what it means to read academic literature in a second language. And he will also describe the assessment that was the result of that work. Nick Swinehart will outline how we were able to realign existing translation courses, primarily in French and German, and then design and develop completely new courses in 10 additional languages to deliver the skills that Ahmet had defined. And the product of that work is the new Academic and Professional Reading Institute, which is launching this summer. So now I'll turn it over to Ahmet.
Thank you, Kathy. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope this doesn't cause any issues here. Everybody can see. Okay. Okay, so as Kathy described, as the first process being impacted by the mandate that Kathy just, provide a summary for. So we had multiple options, to go forward with that mandate of basically finding a solution to that problem. So, like everything we do here, we wanted to make sure we have an evidence-centered approach or evidence-based approach to the problem. And therefore, instead of kind of basing this whole question of what it means to read in a secondary research language based on our assumptions or our personal experiences, we wanted to do a bottom-up research, a very, like exploratory research, understanding what this is. So that research is called domain analysis, is basically helping us to identify what are the key knowledge, skills, and abilities to conduct academic research by reading in a secondary research language. We also had a secondary goal here. Of course, our intention was not just to do the research. We had a goal attached to that research to design a new and innovative reading assessment that is relevant in terms of the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and also not just relevant, but representative of academic research conducted by reading in a secondary research language. So we had to the first step in the research was to identify the domain component, meaning what are the key resources in this domain to inform us about what it is. So we ended up having basically 5 components. Last one is kind of combined, but actually 5 different components. So that included published literature of both academic journals and books, reading textbooks, the actual course books that were published aiming or intending to teach advanced second language reading. We also collected syllabi from the courses that claim to teach advanced reading. Finally, we had also included faculty, graduate faculty specifically, and also graduate students, in terms of faculty, we had a focus group interviews. In terms of students, one-on-one semi-structured interviews. So in terms of our research methodology, as I said at the beginning, we had to approach this, from scratch. We had a clean slate. So that kind of pushed us to look at this very qualitatively and exploratory. So we had an exploratory research, essentially was very qualitative in nature. And the data we collected, from all of these components that I just showed you were mainly textual data, and then basically the analysis we had eventually was also qualitative in nature at the end. So in terms of data collection and analysis, like a little bit looking at in-depth analysis of that. So in terms of published literature, we looked at 2 different databases, 7 journals, and 13 books that we were able to basically find, including Elizabeth Bernhardt's books. Basically, these books were the books that were teaching the scholarship on how to teach second language reading, basically. So the meta level books we are talking about, so that they were not the same as the textbook that I'm going to talk about very soon. So in this published literature, we were actually trying to identify the terms that are used to describe this domain, the skill set, and also what kind of specific components, being targeted there. In terms of the textbooks, these are the actual course books that are used in higher education, targeting, students, mainly graduate students, and teaching them what it means to read in the second language. So we had most of this textbook coming from English because that was the most established kind of domain. We had 1 German and 4 French. At the time, we also looked at other languages, of course, but we could not find, the textbook that were published in English targeting those reading skills in the other languages. And in these textbooks, we were looking for specific component abilities that being targeted, and also what kind of learning tasks they're, presenting, and what kind of text types they're using. We also, as I said, collected course syllabi from English, German, French, and Spanish, again, courses. Again, similarly, we were trying to identify the patterns of specific component and abilities being targeted. The last component in terms of meetings, like basically focus group interviews and student interviews, we had to make sure we have a representation from multiple disciplines so that the results are not biased. So we included 6 faculty and 5 students in these interviews as we did this research. We put all this data basically, qualitatively, again, as a text data. And then we synthesized all this by themes according to the research questions we asked for each of this component. So I'm skipping some technical research details here. If any of you have any questions about like specific procedures we applied, I'll be happy to answer towards the end. So in terms of the first component, which was the published literature, the main question we ask is how is conducting academic research by reading in a secondary research language is defined. So as you can see here, I kind of summarized this into two different slides here. I'm not gonna, talk about each one of these, but the point here is we found that there are different terms, are being used to describe this skill set. Some like call academic reading, some call advanced second language reading, some critical reading, some reading to evaluate, critique, and use information. And then one thing that was interesting that we had a common pattern, which are kind of highlighted in this maroon color or red color, that there were some common skill set being described, defining this skill or defining this phenomena basically. So the second question we had about published literature is what specific abilities are necessary to function effectively in this domain. And we can summarize this in three ways. Basically, reading for academic and research purposes we found requires, first of all, strong reading skills, strong use of reading strategies, as well as being able to analyze what you read. So I'll look at each of these very briefly now. So reading skills were defined as cognitive processes that are subconscious and also automatic in skilled readers. So they had two groups here in terms of skill set, lower level processes and higher level processes. And these were basically described as the fundamentals, to be the fundamental skills to be able to read in a secondary research language. So the second level was reading strategies. They are being defined as approaches that are consciously and intentionally, very important two words here, consciously and intentionally used to accomplish specific goals. And we group them as pre-reading, monitoring comprehension, reading efficiently, using prior knowledge, making connections, synthesizing and inferencing and predicting in terms of different categories here. So the third one, as I said, we also found not just these two levels, we also had to make sure the students had analytical skills defined as essential, basically focus of reading for academic and research purposes. And these were including very high level skills, as you can see, like building or analyzing arguments, like inferencing, hypothesizing. So we basically had now, we're able to define the skill set at three different levels here from the published literature. So now moving on to the reading textbooks. Remember, these were the textbook being used by the instructors teaching the skills in the classroom. We grouped these results into two, lower proficiency and higher proficiency. Each of these is described in its table here. And then for each of these levels, we also, summarize the results in terms of target knowledge and skills, learning and assessment tasks, and also text types. These are the targeted basically goals in each of these. As you can see in the lower level proficiency, we have like things going from, again, very fundamental and also, in terms of proficiency level, from lower level proficiency to higher level proficiency. When it goes to higher proficiency, we actually started to see a very different skill set, and this is basically the level where a lot of published literature defined as advanced reading, and the reading that is necessary basically to be able to function in this domain. As you can see, the targeted skills and assessment or learning tasks in these books and the text types are getting much more advanced. We start to see, for example, writing a summary, or summarizing the argument of a text type of tasks in these books. Now turning to the course syllabi, we basically collected across 4 languages and and across courses that were targeting the skills. We kind of divided those into micro and macro knowledge, skills, and abilities, as well as learning tasks. So at the micro level, for example, we could be specific, such as using dictionary. At the macro level, for example, interpretation, evaluation of the claims in the text, or inferencing, hypothesizing. And then also the learning tasks were kind of also chronologically ordered to match these micro and macro knowledge, skills, and assessments. So this also gave us a good range of what matters in this domain, to understand what matters in this domain. So finally, the last component were faculty meetings and student interviews. So I for the sake of time, I combined these two in this presentation to one slide by basically pointing out the commonalities between these two, which were very important actually to identify. So both faculty and student basically wanted a long-term retainable. This was very important to me actually to find out a retainable skill. They demanded that is a skill should be meaningful and retainable, not just as Kathy mentioned, that was one of the problems associated with the previous practice as a checkbox. It was a checkbox, but here they demanded retainable skill in which basically they gained the ability to synthesize the whole text, to understand text purpose and structure, which is essentially analytical reading or a component of analytical reading, and also the ability to read with topic and questions in mind. So because these readings are not just random readings or reading for pleasure, these are essentially required by PhD programs because the claim is the literature in that given field will benefit from reading beyond English. So therefore, each of the students, when they do this in real life, they have certain topic and questions in mind that they most probably will be basing their dissertation on. So they also finally, they mentioned they also wanted to have the ability to evaluate text relevance to research questions and also to the literature analysis they were conducting for their own research. So all of this, we did all of this, which took about 2 years, by the way. I tried to summarize this research in 2 years to basically identify the answer to these 2 questions, which is the 2 questions we started with, is what does it mean to read secondary academic literature in second language, and what does it take to function? So this is our definition. Therefore, after 2 years of research, we ended up with one sentence. I mean, we'll open the sentence basically. So that we define this as the ability to analytically read scholarly texts and comprehend the central arguments and supporting evidence in these texts, and then to reproduce them in one's own words in the primary research language. Here, we make a distinction between secondary and primary research language, which is English in the US, in North America, and the secondary research language will be any of these languages that are beyond English that students need to read to basically benefit from the literature that has not been translated to English, or maybe translated, but they want to go to the source texts to understand it more in depth. So this was our first goal. Remember, we had 2 goals to do this domain analysis, and number 1 was to define the domain, which is right here. But then we had a second goal. Our second goal was to develop an innovative assessment of advanced second language reading that measures this skill set we just described. And so these are the implications from the research that we just presented on test development project we had, which was then based on design based on the evidence from the research. So as you can see, we had 3 kind of areas. These are not just specific skills. These are 3 areas of knowledge, skills, and abilities you see on the left. For example, the ability to synthesize of entire passage content and reproduce central points, and then the ability to connect specific terms or phrases to the larger argumentative text, or the ability to understand the author intent, Also the ability to convey meaning of an excerpt from the original passage with clarity and accuracy. So now as an assessment people, once you have identified all these skills and abilities, the next job is to turn this into measurable and demonstrable basically tasks so that you can actually measure this ability, so that you are confident that your students can do this kind of can function in these areas. So the assessment tasks therefore included a summary protocol, open-ended questions, and cross-lingual paraphrase in our new innovative assessment. And something we had in mind from all of this is also the text types, because we keep finding the text types are being different. So, and if you remember in our definition, we use the word scholarly texts. So basically scholarly texts are being operationalized in this assessment as the texts that are coming from academic journals or books. But in this case, particularly from students' field of study, because we found that not only the familiarity with the topic, but also the familiarity with the discipline conventions had positively impact the comprehension. So therefore, we want to make sure the text types are discipline specific. So in comparison to what Kathy described previously, where we had 40 students and then they will all get one text, here we could have 40 students and we will probably have 20 different texts based on their disciplines. So this project ended up being Academic Reading Comprehension Assessment, ARCA, which is the assessment itself, which is being used currently to measure graduate students' reading ability for conducting academic research. And it is being used basically to fulfill graduate programs requirement of reading comprehension ability to basically evidence. The format, this is my last summary slide. So the ARCA format, there are 3 parts in ARCA. The first part, which is 60 minutes, it is for reading and note-taking, and students receive a discipline-specific passage. They are able to read, annotate, take notes with the help of a dictionary. We made the dictionary available here because that is what it was happening in real life. Part 2, they have 30 minutes once they read and the text is basically going away during the second part. As you can see, there is no icon there. That is to push them to read more analytically during the first part. So during the second part, they do not have access to the text, and they have 30 minutes to reproduce in their own words, of course, of the key arguments of the text and as much of the supporting evidence they have comprehended in English, because their primary research language is English. The final part, part 3, the text comes back, the same text with their annotations and with their notes, basically. They have 3 open-ended questions, which is basically specifically asking, students to connect certain terms and concepts in the text to the bigger argumentative nature of it. And also a certain question that basically measuring their ability to make inferences or understanding author intent. The last, within the part 3, they also do a cross-lingual paraphrase between 2 languages, of course, where we measure their ability to convey the meaning in the excerpt with clarity and accuracy. So now I will turn to Nick. We'll talk about how we designed the curriculum basically to get us to this skill set.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Amit. I'm going to share my screen and oops, and go full screen. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk about curriculum and implementation. So again, so after we did the domain analysis to identify what students need to be able to do, the ARCA to measure their ability to do those things. With the curriculum design, we wanted to look at how we can help students develop those key knowledge, skills, and abilities in various languages, and then how do we implement that for learners. And so this is another way to look at what Amit talked about earlier with the reading skills, reading strategies, and the analytical skills. Now, the problem we were running into 10 years ago, before we embarked on all this, was we had learners, graduate students who needed to fulfill this requirement. So they were taking this test that was largely translation. And none of this was defined. So it was hard to say what they needed to be able to do before they take that test, other than translate. And in the cases where there was a reading for research course, again, these skills were not clearly defined and strategically implemented in those curriculum. And so we had some students taking a reading for research course with no prior knowledge of the language at all, and then at the end taking this test and trying to fit all of this into one course, and that didn't work very well. So what we were able to do after identifying all this is first say, we want to take these strategies and skills and we want to put those in our reading for research seminars, because what we found is that even students who who have studied a language for several years, rarely do they get ample practice doing these things with scholarly and academic texts, right? And so that's where we thought we could focus to help these students prepare for this. So we created these reading for research seminars where we help learners develop the skills needed to work with academic texts. And these are for students who already have strong reading abilities in the language, right? Or, who can already read in the language. They have these basic reading skills. So once we had those courses in place and identified all this, then we're able to say, okay, what else can we do? We can create foundational reading seminars that can kind of fast track learners, especially these graduate students who need this to graduate, to help them get ready for this seminar, this course, help them develop these skills. So these seminars help develop basic reading skills, and therefore students who either have limited, let's say 1 to 2 years of language study in some languages, or who have no prior knowledge of the language. So we, in German, French, Spanish, and Italian, we take students with no prior language, and this is a 3-week seminar, this is a 6-week seminar, and at the end of those 9 weeks, they're able to, we've been quite successful in preparing them for the ARCA. So in the curriculum design and development process that we do, some key objectives are, first and foremost, focusing on development of functional real-world skills, all those things Ahmet just talked about. These seminars culminate in the ARCA, which is how we make sure they have these skills, and because these are the skills that they need to be able to perform these functions in the real world. From the beginning, we started with online design because we want students who are anywhere over the summer to be able to take these seminars. So in that online format, combining asynchronous independent coursework with multiple weekly synchronous meetings, and assignments utilizing personalized learning in the reading for research seminars, where students are able to work with texts within their discipline. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So we also had a lot of instructor training because these seminars are very unique in many ways. So we had if we have an instructor that we're onboarding, we always start with ARCA test development, so they know very well what students need to be able to do in the ARCA. We also we talk to them about the key knowledge, skills, and abilities of the domain, like we just talked with you. We talk about pedagogy of teaching advanced reading skills. We go over online pedagogy, so balancing synchronous and asynchronous coursework, and some technology like Hypothesis, which is a social annotation tool, and also creating mini lecture videos, and personalized learning. So again, we go over all of this with them because these are all components of our seminars that many even experienced language instructors don't have much experience with. We also have ongoing guidance during the course design and development process. So we help them align advanced reading skills and their course objectives and their content across the modules within their course or seminar. We have several pillars that I'll talk about in just a second. And we have meetings with us and experienced instructors and new instructors, all making sure everyone's on the same page, asking questions, things like that. So some of these pillars for the foundational reading seminars. First, we start with a proficiency-oriented final exam, similar to the ARCA, but at a more of an intermediate-ish reading level. And so we think about, what do students need to be able to do to enter the reading for research seminar, and how can we get them to that level? And so this proficiency-oriented final is very similar to the placement test for going into the reading for research seminar, so that we know that all the students have these abilities to prepare for that course. So from this kind of final, we reverse design intensive grammar instruction and reading practice. With the students need a lot of grammar rules in these courses, but always kind of focusing on applying them in practice in reading. For some of the pillars for the Reading for Research seminars, or we try to get students reading from day one, and we're able to do that now that we've kind of separated these skills into the two red boxes that I showed earlier, right? So students come in with the ability to read, and so we can start them with these kind of texts on day one. So there is some explicit instruction, grammar and vocabulary and conventions of academic genres, right? So everything in those genres that they're going to encounter. And then a lot of application, again, in context reading practice. So finally, some of the personalized learning examples, for example, annotated bibliography, where they select 8 journals or books in your field, if you are the student. For each source, you provide some basic information about the title, but then a structured analysis of the type of research and approach of this journal or book, and then whether or how this source might be useful in your research. And so again, we have students in each of their disciplines going out and looking for these things in ways that are relevant to them. Another pillar is what we call process exercises. And so in the annotated bibliography, they're collecting, say, 8 or so different sources. Here, they kind of pick one of those and narrow in. They identify an article or a book chapter. They choose a passage of about 100 words that you might cite in your research. And first, they contextualize that by summarizing the entire article, why they selected the passage, how it fits in the overall argument of the article. And then paraphrasing, like Amit talked about, with accuracy and clarity, similar to what they would do if they were putting this into their research paper, right? And then a little more analysis about argumentation and structure. The final pillar here is 2 ARCA practice exams. One is roughly in the middle of the seminar, acts kind of like a midterm. One is towards the end. Both of these act as formative assessments where the instructor can make sure that these learners are on the path to developing the skills they need to develop. And it also helps them prepare for the ARCA in terms of the types of tasks they're going to encounter, becoming familiar with those tasks, the time pressure that they're going to face in the ARCA. And again, most importantly, making sure learners can do these real world functions as they are measured on the ARCA. So in the end, after all that, we now have the Academic and Professional Reading Institute that we are very excited about. We have this summer, we have 19 seminars across 12 languages. They're all online, non-credit seminars open to students across the country. Again, we have placement tests to ensure participants have the required reading skills where applicable. And the ARCA serves as the final for all the reading and research seminars. And at UChicago, successful completion of the seminar and passing the ARCA satisfies the graduate reading requirement. And that is now the norm across graduate programs at U of Chicago. Of course, at other institutions, it would be up to that institution to decide whether passing the seminar and passing the ARCA would satisfy the requirement at your institution, right? So this summer we have reading for research seminars in Arabic, Chinese, French, German. You can read all these languages just as well as I can. So these 12 languages, and then we have foundational reading seminars in these languages where so again, no prerequisite for French, German, Italian, Spanish. Learners can do all of this from 0 to this high level in one summer. And we have about intermediate high or 2 to 3 years of language study for Chinese, Persian, and Turkish foundational reading seminars. And we have this beautiful new website where you can go and learn all about our seminars and learn more about the history behind them and how to apply and share that with your students. Okay. I'm going to send it back to Kathy. Kathy muted. All right.
Thanks, Nick. And we'll start. So now back to this overview, and I hope you've gained the understanding of our evidence-based approach to beginning with defining the skills and being able to test the skills. It's Amit's special area, and then finally the design of the curriculum, each step building on the other, always based on this evidence. We always start from that evidence, and now we're here on our journey to launch the Opry. And then I want to return to some of those challenges and and issues that I opened with, because and describe the impact that the Reading for Research courses or seminars that have already been in place on our campus and using the ARC on our campus, the really positive impact of both of those components, both the foundational and the Reading for Research seminar, and of course the ARCA. So in terms of the students, they have a real sense that they are gaining and demonstrating they have real world reading skills. That's probably really the key issue in terms of all of these levels, at that in terms of the students' point of view, they're getting skills they really can use as students and as scholars, or wherever their graduate work takes them. They're also including, as Nick mentioned, resources and work in their discipline. So as soon as they hit the Reading for Research seminar, they're in their own resources, journals, in their discipline. So it's very much, again, tied to the real world. International students now have a more level playing field because they're doing the work they need to do. It's still the challenge, of course, of having to read already in a different language than their native language. That is the case always, because they're here studying in the United States. But the differentiated instruction that's allowed by the online format means that the international students have the time doing the asynchronous work to do the work they need to do to be at the same place as their students who are native speakers of English. And also we find that students are completing their language requirement earlier in their studies, so they're actually able to use those skills as graduate students. In fact, we really encourage departments to require that students show that they're using research and other resources as students in their writing, in their research papers, to further develop those skills. In terms of the faculty, they find now that their requirements are meaningful because the requirement is the actual skill set that the students need. And as Ahmet mentioned, it came up in his sessions with talking to faculty and talking to students. They wanted skills that they could use as students and beyond. They wanted retainable skills. This also lets them match students' research to different languages. As we've been able to create the Reading for Research seminars across multiple languages, departments began to, or faculty began to meet with students and use what they called a language contract. So no longer were French and German the only languages available for students. They now can truly choose a language, secondary research language, to read in that they need, that is germane to their work. So students are able to access pertinent resources earlier in their careers. And also in terms of the faculty, the pass rate is very consistent. It's a high pass rate. It's very reliable. So we don't have students failing over and over again because the knowledge, skills, and abilities are clearly laid out. The test is clear. The courses have been designed to meet those requirements, and we're seeing a successful and very good pass rate. In terms of the programmatic level, there's consistent messaging, consistent processes, test administration, consistent outcomes across programs. There's a lot more clarity there. This has streamlined, or at least removed, this barrier in their progress to their degree. And directors of graduate study and administrators can be more proactive with students and also rely on us to be allies to support the students, because we all understand what the requirement is, how it's being tested, and how it's being taught. Now that Opry is really in place on our campus, we recognized we wanted to share it because we know, I would say we're very confident that these seminars and the ARCA can be useful to our peer institutions for many of the same reasons that these tests and the courses, the seminars, are useful on our campus, especially considering the landscape described by Elizabeth Bernhardt. We know there are similar issues we were facing 8 to 10 years ago on campuses around North America. Also, as I think Nick mentioned, the seminars have been optimally designed to be optimally accessible, not only in terms of their curriculum, the online curriculum, the timing, that the many requirements can be completed in one summer, and the seminar fees. These are not University of Chicago 4-credit courses. This allows us to offer them at a very reasonable fee to students, to your students, as well as our students, I would add. From the get-go, these have not been designed, nor do we see ourselves as being in competition with 4Skills and other language courses, for that matter, being offered in all the departments on our campuses. Rather, these are specific skills that are more complementary to our colleagues. So it is not, we are not competing with departments. We are offering something that's necessary, that complements skills students are gaining in more traditional 4Skills language courses. Also because, of course, the Opry reading for research seminars and foundational seminars are taught completely in English and focus completely on reading. So while some of those have prerequisites that will be served by the 4Skills classes, these are have been designed for the very specific purpose. So with that, I think we can open things up to some of the questions posted in the Q&A